start by saying something that may challenge everything you've been taught to believe. You were not designed to live your life for everyone else's expectations. And I want you to sit with that for a moment, because most people never question it. They wake up every day responding to demands, meeting obligations, fulfilling roles, and slowly, without realizing it, they lose themselves in the process. Not because they are weak, but because they were conditioned to believe that putting themselves first is wrong. Now think about how deep this conditioning goes. From a young age, you were taught to be agreeable, to be available, to be accommodating. You were praised for saying yes, rewarded for sacrificing your time, your energy, your priorities. And over time, you learned that being needed meant being valuable. But what no one told you is that constant availability leads to silent exhaustion. That always saying yes eventually becomes a form of self-neglect. However, here is the truth that most people avoid confronting. Society glorifies self-sacrifice, but it ignores self-destruction. It celebrates the person who gives everything to others, but it rarely asks what that person has left for themselves. And so you end up in a cycle where you are constantly pouring out, constantly showing up, constantly giving, and yet internally you are drained. Not because life is too hard, but because you have been overextending yourself for too long. So let me ask you something honestly. How many times have you said yes when you meant no? How many times have you put your priorities aside to meet someone else's expectations? How many times have you delayed your own growth, your own goals, your own peace, just to maintain approval? Because if you are honest, you will realize that a significant part of your life has been shaped by external demands rather than internal direction. Meanwhile, this is where the misunderstanding begins. Because the moment you start thinking about yourself, the moment you start setting limits, the moment you start prioritizing your growth, you feel guilty. You feel like you are doing something wrong. And that guilt is not natural, it is learned. It is the result of years of conditioning that told you your value comes from how much you give to others, not how well you develop yourself. But let me redefine that for you right now. Thinking about yourself is not selfish, it is strategic. It is the foundation of a powerful life. Because if you are not clear, not focused, not disciplined, not aligned, then everything you give to others will be incomplete. You cannot pour from an empty source and expect it to create meaningful impact. Furthermore, when you begin to prioritize yourself, you are not taking away from others. You are strengthening your capacity to show up at a higher level. You are becoming more intentional, more effective, more grounded. And that shift changes everything. Because now you are no longer reacting to life, you are directing it. So I want you to confront something deeply personal right now. How much of your life have you lived for others instead of yourself? Not partially, not occasionally, but consistently. How many decisions have you made based on expectations instead of purpose? How many opportunities have you ignored because you were too busy maintaining roles that no longer serve you? And this is where the awakening begins. Because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Once you realize that you have been operating in a pattern of self-neglect disguised as responsibility, something inside you starts to shift. You begin to question what you have been accepting. You begin to challenge what you have been tolerating. And most importantly, you begin to consider a different way of living. So understand this clearly. You are not here to be everything for everyone. You are here to become something fully for yourself first. Because when you become aligned, when you become disciplined, when you become intentional, you naturally elevate everything and everyone around you. But that elevation does not come from sacrifice, it comes from self-mastery. And right now, in this moment, a decision is forming. A decision to stop abandoning yourself. A decision to stop living reactively. A decision to start thinking, acting, and choosing with yourself in mind. Not out of selfishness, but out of responsibility for your own life. So let me ask you, are you ready to go deeper into the next section where we expose the real cost of neglecting yourself and why it has been silently holding you back? Now we move deeper, because once awareness is created, it must be confronted. And what you are about to see is not surface level, it is the hidden cost you have been paying for a life where you consistently place yourself last. Consider this carefully. Every time you ignore your own needs, every time you silence your own priorities, every time you delay your own growth, you are not just making a small compromise, you are creating a pattern. And patterns, when repeated long enough, become your lifestyle. That means self-neglect is not a one-time decision. It becomes a way of living. Now here's where it becomes dangerous. On the outside, everything may look fine. You are responsible, you are dependable, you are there for others. But internally, something is slowly breaking down. You feel tired more often, you feel disconnected from yourself, you start questioning your direction, your purpose, your energy, and you cannot always explain why, because from the outside it looks like you are doing everything right. However, what is happening beneath the surface is burnout. Not the kind that comes from working too hard on your purpose, but the kind that comes from constantly working for things that are not aligned with you. Burnout that comes from saying yes too often, from overcommitting, from carrying responsibilities that were never yours to begin with. Additionally, when you continuously neglect yourself, you begin to lose clarity about who you are. Because identity is built through intentional action. But if your actions are always dictated by others, then your identity becomes fragmented. You start becoming different versions of yourself depending on who you are around, instead of becoming one consistent, grounded individual. And then something else begins to grow quietly, resentment. Not always loud, not always obvious, but present. Because deep down you know you are giving more than you should. You know you are overextending. And even if you don't express it outwardly, internally, it builds. And over time that resentment begins to affect your relationships, your mindset, and your overall peace. So let me bring this to you directly. You cannot build a powerful life while abandoning yourself. It is impossible. Because everything meaningful, growth, discipline, purpose, execution, requires your energy, your focus, your attention. And if all of that is constantly being given away, there is nothing left to build with. Meanwhile, many people confuse being busy with being productive. They fill their schedules, they respond to every demand, they stay active, but they are not progressing. Because progress requires alignment. It requires intentional movement towards something that actually matters to you. And if your life is driven by reaction instead of intention, then no matter how busy you are, you will feel stuck. So think about this honestly. How many times have you said yes when it disrupted your own plans? How many times have you prioritized someone else's urgency over your own importance? How many times have you chosen to avoid discomfort in the moment, only to create frustration in the long run? And here is the reality you must face. Every time you choose others at the expense of yourself, you are not being noble, you are being neglectful of your own potential. Because there is a difference between helping others and losing yourself. And most people don't realize when they have crossed that line until the damage is already done. Furthermore, living reactively keeps you in survival mode. You are constantly responding, constantly adjusting, constantly adapting, but never leading. And if you are not leading your life, then your life is being led by circumstances, by people, by expectations. And that is not a position of power, that is a position of control. So this is the moment where honesty must replace comfort. Because if you continue this pattern, nothing changes. You remain exhausted, you remain unclear, you remain stuck in cycles of effort without fulfillment. But if you confront it, if you acknowledge it, if you decide that this is no longer acceptable, then everything begins to shift. And once that shift begins, the next step becomes necessary, because awareness of the problem is not enough. You must now redefine your role in your own life. You must move from being someone who reacts to everything to someone who leads themselves with clarity and intention. Let me challenge your thinking, because this is where the shift must happen. Thinking about yourself is not selfish, it is necessary. It is not pride, it is responsibility. It is not arrogance, it is alignment. Because how can you pour from a cup that is empty? How can you lead others when you have not led yourself? How can you grow others when you are not growing? At some point you must come to the understanding that neglecting yourself is not humility, it is mismanagement. The Word of God gives us a powerful balance in Mark chapter 12, verse 31, where it says, "You shall love your neighbor as yourself." Notice that as yourself, that means there is already an expectation that you love yourself, that you value yourself, that you care for yourself. Because if you do not, how can you truly extend that same love to others? If your version of love is always sacrificing yourself, always draining yourself, always ignoring yourself, then what you are giving is not healthy love, it is imbalance. And then Galatians chapter 6 verse 5 says that each one should carry their own load. That means you are responsible for your life, not someone else. Not your friends, not your family, not the people you are trying to please. You have a personal assignment. You have a life to build. You have growth that is required of you. And if you keep carrying everyone else's expectations while ignoring your own responsibility, you will end up living a life that looks full on the outside but feels empty on the inside. So let me ask you, are you ready to step into the next section where we establish you as your greatest responsibility and begin building true self-leadership? Now we transition into the level where real transformation begins. Because once you recognize the cost of neglecting yourself, the next question becomes unavoidable. Who is responsible for your life? And the answer is not external. It is not your environment, not your background, not the people around you. It is you. So let's establish this with clarity. Before you lead anything else, you must lead yourself. And that is where most people struggle, because it is easier to manage responsibilities outside than to confront what is happening within. It is easier to show up for others than to develop discipline for yourself. But self-leadership is not optional if you want to build a life that is intentional and powerful. Now understand what this means. You are your greatest responsibility, not in a selfish way, but in a foundational way. Because everything you do, everything you build, everything you pursue, it all flows from you. Your thinking, your habits, your standards, your decisions. And if those are not aligned, then nothing you produce externally will be stable. Meanwhile, most people are operating without clear internal leadership. They react based on mood. They act based on pressure. They decide based on circumstances. And because of that, their lives feel inconsistent. One day they are focused, the next day they are distracted. One moment they are disciplined, the next they are avoiding. And that inconsistency is not random, it is the result of a lack of self-leadership. However, the moment you step into self-leadership, everything begins to change. Because now you are no longer waiting to feel ready, you are deciding to act. You are no longer looking for direction externally, you are creating it internally. And that shift gives you control over your life in a way that most people never experience. So let's break this down further. Self-leadership begins with self-awareness. You must understand your patterns, your habits, your tendencies. You must know where you are strong and where you are inconsistent. Because you cannot lead what you do not understand. And most people avoid this level of awareness because it requires honesty. But awareness alone is not enough. You must establish personal standards, standards that define how you operate regardless of circumstances, standards that say, this is how I show up, not when it is convenient, but consistently, because standards create structure, and structure creates stability. Additionally, self-leadership requires alignment. That means your thoughts, your words, and your actions must match, because when they don't, you create internal conflict. You say one thing, you do another, and over time you lose trust in yourself. And once self-trust is broken, everything becomes harder. Discipline, focus, execution. So here is the shift that must happen. You move from approval-seeking to self-directed living. You stop asking, what do they expect from me, and start asking, what do I require from myself? Because when your life is driven by external approval, you will always be adjusting, always adapting, always compromising. But when it is driven by internal standards, you become stable, consistent, and focused. Now let me bring this to you directly. Who have you been allowing to define your direction? Who or what has been influencing your decisions more than your own clarity? Because until you take that control back, you will continue to live a life that is shaped by others instead of directed by you. Furthermore, self-leadership is not about control, it is about responsibility. It is about owning your decisions, your actions, your outcomes. No excuses, no blame. Because the moment you take full responsibility, you gain full power to change. And here is where it becomes real. Once you accept that you are your greatest responsibility, you can no longer operate casually. You can no longer be inconsistent. Because now every action you take is either building you or weakening you. There is no neutral. So right now, something must shift internally. You must decide that you are no longer going to live by default. You are no longer going to drift. You are no longer going to react to to everything around you. You are going to lead yourself with clarity, with intention, and with discipline. And once that decision is made, the next step becomes unavoidable, because self-leadership without boundaries will collapse. You cannot lead yourself effectively if you allow everything and everyone to have access to your time, your energy, and your focus. Let's go deeper, because what you have been calling selflessness may actually be a misunderstanding of responsibility. Many people have been taught, directly or indirectly, that focusing on themselves is wrong, that prioritizing their growth is selfish, that saying no makes them a bad person. So they grow up constantly available, constantly giving, constantly adjusting their lives to fit others. But what they were never taught is that self-focus in the right context is not selfishness, it is stewardship. It is taking care of what God has entrusted to you. The Bible makes this responsibility very clear in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 19 to 20, where it says that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit, and you are not your own, you were bought with a price. That means your life carries value, and you are accountable for how you manage it. You cannot treat yourself carelessly and expect to live purposefully. And then Proverbs chapter 4 verse 23 says, guard your heart with all diligence, for out of it flow the issues of life. That means your life is flowing from within you. Your results, your decisions, your direction, they are all connected to what is happening inside you. So if you neglect your inner life, your outer life will eventually suffer. So let me ask you, are you ready to step into the next section where we build the discipline of boundaries and redefine how people and distractions interact with your life? Now we step into one of the most practical and necessary dimensions of self-leadership, because without this, everything you've built so far will slowly collapse under pressure. And that dimension is boundaries. Not suggestions, not preferences, boundaries. Because no matter how clear your identity is, no matter how strong your intentions are, if you do not protect your time, your energy, and your focus, you will eventually be pulled back into the same patterns. So understand this clearly. Every time you fail to set boundaries, you betray your future. Not immediately, not always visibly, but consistently. Because every unnecessary yes is taking time away from something that actually matters. Every unchecked demand is draining energy that should be invested in your growth. And over time, those small compromises become major setbacks. Now consider how boundaries actually work. They are not about controlling other people, they are about controlling access. They define what you allow, what you accept, and what you reject. And whether you realize it or not, you are already setting boundaries. The question is, are they intentional or accidental? Meanwhile, many people avoid setting boundaries because they fear how others will react. They worry about being misunderstood. They worry about disappointing people. They worry about being seen differently. So instead of being clear, they remain available. Instead of being firm, they remain flexible. And in trying to keep everyone comfortable, they make themselves unavailable for their own priorities. However, here is the truth you must accept. You train people how to treat you, not through what you say, but through what you tolerate. If you constantly make yourself available, people will expect it. If you constantly adjust your plans for others, people will rely on it. And if you never communicate your limits, no one will respect them because they do not even know they exist. So this is where discipline comes in. Because boundaries are not emotional, they are strategic. They are decisions you make in advance about how you will operate. Decisions that say, this is what I allow, and just as importantly, this is what I do not allow. And once those decisions are made, your role is to enforce them consistently. Now let me bring this closer to you. Where are you overextending yourself right now? Where are you giving time you cannot afford to give? Where are you saying yes when it disrupts your focus, your growth, your peace? Because those are the exact areas where boundaries are required. Additionally, setting boundaries is not just about saying no to others, it is also about saying yes to yourself. Yes to your goals, yes to your discipline, yes to your time. Because every boundary you set creates space. Space to think, space to act, space to grow. And without that space, your progress will always feel restricted. Furthermore, understand that boundaries will not always be comfortable. There will be moments where people question you. There will be moments where you feel the urge to explain yourself excessively. There will be moments where you feel guilty for choosing yourself, but that discomfort is part of the process because you are breaking a pattern. You are shifting from being over-available to being intentional. And here is the deeper truth. People who truly respect you will adjust. And those who don't were benefiting from your lack of boundaries in the first place. So you are not losing anything, you are refining your environment. So from this moment forward, your approach must change. You do not respond to everything. You do not accept every request. You do not make yourself constantly accessible. You operate with intention. You decide where your time goes, where your energy goes, and where your focus goes. And once you begin to do that, something powerful happens. You start to regain control. Your schedule becomes clearer. Your mind becomes sharper. Your actions become more aligned. Because now your life is no longer open to everything. It is directed toward what matters. And that leads us to the next level. Because once boundaries are in place, the question becomes, what do you actually focus on? Because protecting your time is one thing, but directing it effectively is another. So let me ask you, are you ready to move into the next section where we eliminate distractions completely and sharpen your focus to a level that drives real progress? Now this is where it becomes uncomfortable, because many people don't realize that the reason they keep neglecting themselves is not just habit, it is the need for approval. It is the desire to be liked, to be accepted, to avoid disappointing others. And without realizing it, you begin to build your life around people's expectations instead of God's purpose. You say yes when you should say no. You agree when you should stand firm. You adjust your life to keep others comfortable, even when it is costing you your growth. The truth is, people-pleasing is subtle, but it is powerful. It doesn't always look like weakness. Sometimes it looks like kindness. Sometimes it looks like loyalty. Sometimes it even looks like love. But underneath it is fear, the fear of rejection, the fear of being misunderstood, the fear of not being accepted. And as long as that fear is in control, you will continue to shrink yourself to fit into spaces that were never designed for your purpose. The Bible speaks directly to this in Galatians chapter 1, verse 10, where it says, "Am I now trying to win the approval of human beings or of God? If I was still trying to please people, I would not be a servant of Christ." That is a strong statement. It makes it clear that you cannot live for God's approval and people's approval at the same time. At some point you must choose. And then Proverbs chapter 29, verse 25 says that the fear of man brings a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord shall be safe. A snare is a trap. That means when you live for people's opinions, you trap yourself. You lose your freedom, you lose your direction, you lose your voice. Think about someone who has dreams, ideas, and a clear sense of what they should do. But every decision they make is filtered through one question: what will people say? So they don't start the business. They don't step into the calling. They don't speak up. They don't take bold action. Not because they don't have the ability, but because they are afraid of how it will be perceived. And slowly they begin to live a life that is shaped by others instead of a life that is led by purpose. And here is the danger. People will always have opinions. No matter what you do, someone will agree and someone will disagree. If you succeed, some will celebrate, others will criticize. If you fail, some will support, others will judge. So if you build your life around people's responses, you will never be stable. You will be constantly adjusting, constantly shrinking, constantly second-guessing yourself. This is why you must break free from that mindset. You must come to a place where your decisions are no longer controlled by approval, but guided by purpose. Where you are willing to be misunderstood in order to be aligned. Where you are willing to disappoint people if it means being faithful to what God has called you to do. Because here is the truth. Every time you say yes to people at the expense of yourself, you are saying no to your growth. Every time you choose approval over purpose, you delay your progress. And every time you shrink to fit expectations, you limit what God can do through you. You don't need everyone to agree with you. You don't need everyone to understand you. You don't need everyone to support you. What you need is clarity. What you need is conviction. What you need is the courage to stand in what you know God has placed inside you. So this is the moment where you must release that pressure. The pressure to be liked. The pressure to be accepted. The pressure to meet everyone's expectations. Because you were not created to live for people. You were created to live with purpose. Now as we move forward, everything begins to shift inward, because once you stop living for others, you must start understanding yourself. who you are, what you carry, and what you are called to do. Now we move into the level where everything you've protected must be directed with precision, because boundaries without focus still lead to wasted potential. You can guard your time, you can reduce distractions, but if you don't channel your energy intentionally, you will still feel scattered. And most people are not lacking time, they are lacking focus. So understand this principle clearly. Where your attention goes, your life follows. Your results are a direct reflection of what you consistently focus on. Not occasionally, not when you feel like it, but daily. Because attention is one of your most valuable resources, and every time you give it away carelessly, you are weakening your ability to build something meaningful. Now think about how often your focus is interrupted. Notifications, conversations, unnecessary obligations, endless scrolling, reacting to things that have nothing to do with your goals. And each time your attention shifts, your energy fragments. You start something, you stop, you restart, you delay. And by the end of the day, you feel busy but not productive. However, the real issue is not the distractions themselves. It is your willingness to allow them. Because distractions will always exist. There will always be something competing for your attention. The question is whether you are disciplined enough to stay aligned with what matters. So this is where you must become intentional. Focus is not something you hope for. It is something you train. It is the ability to decide what matters and stay with it even when your mind wants to drift, even when something easier or more comfortable presents itself. Meanwhile, many people struggle with this because they are still operating in reaction mode. They respond to whatever appears in front of them instead of following a defined direction. And when you live like that, your day controls you instead of you controlling your day. So let me bring this to you directly. What are you giving your attention to that does not contribute to your growth? What are you allowing into your space that distracts you from your purpose? Because every distraction is not just taking your time, it is taking your future. It is delaying your progress in ways you may not immediately see. Additionally, focus requires elimination. Not everything deserves your energy. Not every opportunity is aligned. Not every request is necessary. And part of becoming disciplined is learning to say no, not just to people, but to distractions, habits, and patterns that do not serve your direction. Furthermore, when you begin to focus properly, something shifts internally. Your mind becomes clearer, your actions become more efficient, your progress becomes visible. Because now you are no longer spreading your energy across multiple directions, you are concentrating it on what truly matters. So what does this look like in practice? It means you define your priorities before your day begins. You decide what must be done and you commit to it. You remove anything that interferes with that commitment, and you execute with presence, not partially, not distractedly, but fully engaged. Now here is the deeper truth. Focus is a form of self-respect. Because when you focus, you are telling yourself that your goals matter, that your time matters, that your life is worth directing intentionally. And that level of respect changes how you operate. And once you begin to operate with that level of clarity, something powerful starts to happen. You move faster, you think sharper, you execute better, not because you are doing more, but because you are doing what matters. So now you have boundaries and you have focus. But there is one more layer that determines whether this becomes consistent or temporary. Because knowing what to do is not enough. You must be able to do it every single day. So let me ask you, are you ready to step into the next section where we build the discipline required to choose yourself daily, not occasionally? Now this is where everything becomes personal, because once you stop living for people, you are left with a question that many avoid. Who are you when nobody is influencing you? Who are you when there is no pressure to impress, no expectation to meet, no one to validate you? Because until you can answer that, you will always be pulled in different directions. You will always be uncertain. You will always be reacting instead of living with intention. Self-awareness is one of the most powerful things you can develop, yet it is one of the most neglected. Many people know others deeply, but don't know themselves at all. You can describe your friends, your family, even strangers, but when it comes to your own strengths, your weaknesses, your patterns, your purpose, there is confusion. And that confusion is what leads to misalignment. Because if you don't know who you are, you will accept anything. You will follow any path. You will settle for whatever comes your way. The Bible challenges this directly in 2 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 5, where it says, "Examine yourselves whether you are in the faith, test yourselves." That means take time to reflect, to evaluate, to understand what is happening within you. Don't just move through life without awareness. And then in Psalm chapter 139, verse 14, it says, "I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made." That is not just a statement of praise, it is a revelation of identity. It means there is intentional design in you. There is uniqueness in you. There is something specific about how God created you that is connected to your purpose. But you will never fully step into that if you don't take time to understand yourself. What are your strengths? Not what people expect from you, but what is naturally inside you. What are your weaknesses? Not to condemn yourself, but to become aware so you can grow. What patterns keep repeating in your life? What habits are helping you and which ones are holding you back? These are questions you must be willing to ask, because awareness is what leads to change. Think about someone who spent years just going with the flow, doing what others expected, following paths that were not truly aligned with who they were. They felt busy, but not fulfilled. Active, but not purposeful. Then one day they decided to pause and reflect. They began to ask themselves honest questions. They started discovering what they were truly passionate about, what they were naturally good at, what direction felt aligned, and slowly their life began to shift. Not because opportunities suddenly appeared, but because clarity increased. You see, awareness leads to alignment. When you understand yourself, you begin to make better decisions. You stop chasing everything and start focusing on what truly matters. You stop comparing yourself to others because you recognize that your path is different. You stop wasting time on things that don't contribute to your growth because you know where you are going. And this is where confidence begins to grow, not from external validation, but from internal clarity. When you know who you are, you move differently, you speak differently, you decide differently. You are not easily shaken because you are grounded in understanding. So you must create time for this. Time to reflect, time to think, time to evaluate your life honestly. Not to criticize yourself, but to understand yourself. Because the more you understand who you are, the more you can align with who you are meant to become. Now, as we move forward, this awareness must lead to something practical, something that shifts your life from reflection to action. Because once you know better, you must begin to take responsibility for your life. Now we step into the layer that determines whether everything you've learned becomes a lifestyle or remains a moment. Because clarity without consistency fades, focus without discipline weakens, and intention without execution changes nothing. This is where you prove to yourself that you are serious. So understand this clearly. Thinking about yourself once is awareness. Doing it daily is discipline. And discipline is what separates temporary change from permanent transformation. It is what ensures that the decisions you make today are still being honored tomorrow, next week, and long after this moment has passed. Now consider how most people operate. They have moments of clarity, moments where they feel motivated, where they see things differently, where they decide to change. But because there is no discipline to support that decision, they slowly drift back into old patterns. Not because they want to, but because they have not built the structure required to sustain change. However, discipline is not something you wait to feel. It is something you build through repetition. It is choosing what is necessary over what is comfortable. It is doing what you said you would do, even when you don't feel like it. And those moments, those quiet, unseen moments, are what shape your identity. So let me bring this closer to you. Every day you are making choices. Small choices that may seem insignificant, but over time they define your direction. Whether you follow your plan or ignore it. Whether you protect your time or give it away. Whether you stay focused or get distracted. And each of those choices is either strengthening your future or weakening it. Meanwhile, discipline is built through non-negotiables. Things that you do regardless of mood, regardless of circumstances, regardless of convenience. Because if everything is optional, nothing becomes consistent. And if nothing is consistent, nothing compounds. So this is where you must establish your daily standards. Not based on how you feel, but based on who you have decided to become. Standards that say, this is how I operate. Standards that do not change when things get difficult. Because difficulty is not the exception, it is part of the process. Additionally, choosing yourself daily requires you to prioritize long-term value over short-term comfort. Because comfort is always available. It is easy to delay, to rest when you should act, to avoid what requires effort. But every time you choose comfort over growth, you reinforce a pattern. And that pattern over time becomes your reality. However, every time you choose discipline, you are reinforcing something different. You are proving to yourself that you can be trusted, that your words matter, that your commitments are real, and that self-trust becomes one of your greatest assets. Because once you trust yourself, hesitation decreases and execution becomes natural. Now understand this. Discipline is not about perfection. You will not get everything right every day, but it is about consistency. It is about returning to your standards even when you slip. It is about maintaining direction even when progress feels slow. Furthermore, discipline creates freedom, not restriction. Because when you are disciplined, you are in control. Your time is structured. Your actions are intentional. Your progress is measurable. And that level of control removes chaos from your life. So from this moment forward, your approach must shift. You are no longer relying on motivation. You are no longer waiting for the right feeling. You are building systems, routines, and habits that ensure you choose yourself every single day. And once that becomes your standard, something powerful begins to happen. You stop negotiating with yourself. You stop delaying, you stop drifting, because your actions are no longer dependent on how you feel. They are aligned with who you are. So now you are building consistency. You are reinforcing your identity. You are choosing yourself daily. But there is still one major barrier that can disrupt all of this if it is not addressed. So let me ask you, are you ready to move into the next section where we eliminate the need for external validation and build true emotional independence? Now we step into a level that will either strengthen everything you've built or quietly destroy it if left unchecked. Because no matter how disciplined you become, no matter how focused you are, if your decisions are still influenced by the need for approval, your progress will always be unstable. And that influence is subtle. It does not always appear as obvious dependence. It shows up in hesitation, in overthinking, in constantly questioning yourself. So understand this clearly. If you need everyone's approval, you will never have your own. And the reason is simple. You cannot fully commit to your direction if you are constantly adjusting it to fit other people's expectations. Every time you seek validation, you are outsourcing your authority. You are asking someone else to confirm what you should already know. Now think about how often this happens. You have an idea, but before you act, you wonder what others will think. You want to make a decision, but you hesitate because you're unsure how it will be received. You feel called to do something different, but you hold back because it might not be accepted. And in all of those moments, your life is being shaped, not by your clarity, but by external opinions. However, here is the truth you must confront. Most people are not thinking about you as much as you think they are. They are focused on their own lives, their own challenges, their own concerns. Yet you are delaying your progress based on imagined judgments. And that delay becomes a pattern. So this is where the shift must happen. You move from external validation to internal validation. That means your confidence is no longer built on approval. It is built on action. It is built on doing what you said you would do. It is built on keeping promises to yourself. Because real confidence does not come from what people say about you. It comes from what you prove to yourself consistently. Additionally, emotional independence means you no longer need permission to move. You stop waiting for someone to agree, to support, or to validate your decisions before you act. Because if you are always waiting for approval, you will always be late. Late to opportunities, late to growth, late to becoming who you are meant to be. Furthermore, you must understand that not everyone will understand your direction. Not everyone will agree with your choices. Not everyone will support your growth. And that is not a problem, it is reality. Because your life is not designed to meet everyone's expectations. It is designed to fulfill your potential. So let me bring this directly to you. Where are you still seeking validation? Where are you hesitating because of what someone might think? Where are you adjusting your behavior to fit into expectations that no longer align with who you are becoming? Because until you remove that dependency, you will continue to limit yourself. You will continue to shrink your vision. You will continue to delay your execution, not because you are incapable, but because you are waiting for approval that is not necessary. Now, here is the deeper truth. Emotional independence does not mean you ignore people. It means you are not controlled by them. You can listen, you can consider, but ultimately you decide. Because your life is your responsibility, and responsibility requires authority. So from this moment forward, your mindset must shift. You no longer ask, will they approve? You ask, is this aligned with who I am becoming? And if the answer is yes, you move. Not later. Not after validation. Immediately. And once you begin to operate like that, something powerful happens. Your confidence becomes stable. Your decisions become faster. Your actions become more consistent. Because you are no longer dependent on external feedback to move forward. So now you are thinking for yourself. You are choosing yourself. You are leading yourself. But there is still one critical step remaining. Because clarity, discipline, and independence must all translate into one thing: execution. So let me ask you, are you ready to move into the next section where we take everything you've built and turn it into intentional, structured action that produces real results? Now we arrive at the level where everything must translate into action, because no matter how much clarity you have, no matter how strong your discipline is, no matter how independent your thinking becomes, none of it matters without execution. And this is where many people fall short. Not because they don't understand, but because they don't apply. So understand this with precision. A focused life is a constructed life. It does not happen by chance. It does not come together accidentally. It is built deliberately, intentionally, consistently. And if you are not building your life, then you are living by default. You are reacting, adjusting, and adapting to whatever comes your way instead of directing your path. Now consider how most people approach their days. They wake up without a clear plan. They respond to messages, react to situations, handle whatever appears. And by the end of the day, they feel busy but not fulfilled. Because activity is not the same as progress. Movement is not the same as direction. However, execution changes that. Execution forces clarity into action. It takes what you know and turns it into what you do. And once you begin to execute consistently, your life starts to take shape in a way that is measurable. So this is where structure becomes essential. You must begin to design your days, not loosely, not occasionally, but intentionally. You decide what matters before the day begins. You identify your priorities. You allocate your time. And then you commit to those decisions. Additionally, execution requires alignment. Your actions must reflect your goals, because if your daily behavior does not support your long-term vision, then your vision is just an idea. And many people live in that space thinking about what they want, but not aligning their actions with it. So let me bring this directly to you. What are you doing daily that moves your life forward? Not what are you thinking about, not what are you planning, but what are you actually doing? Because your results are not based on your intentions, they are based on your actions. Furthermore, execution follows a simple but powerful process. You decide what needs to be done, you act on it without delay, you review the outcome, and you improve. Then you repeat that cycle over and over. Because improvement is not a one-time event, it is a continuous process. Meanwhile, many people get stuck because they overthink execution. They want the perfect plan, the perfect timing, the perfect conditions. But as you already understand, perfection delays progress. Execution requires movement, even when things are not ideal. So from this moment forward, your standard must change. You do not wait to feel ready, you act. You do not wait for everything to be clear. You start with what you know, and you adjust as you move. Because clarity comes through action, not before it. Now here is the deeper truth. Execution builds confidence. Not thinking, not planning, doing. Every time you take action, you reinforce your identity. You prove to yourself that you are someone who follows through. And that proof strengthens your belief in your ability. And once that belief grows, your actions become stronger, your decisions become faster, your hesitation decreases. Because you are no longer operating on assumption, you are operating on experience. So now everything is coming together. You are thinking intentionally, you are setting boundaries, you are focused, you are disciplined, you are independent, and now you are executing. But there is one final layer that determines whether this becomes unstoppable. Because execution alone is powerful, but when it becomes consistent over time, it creates something even greater. So let me ask you, are you ready to step into the final phase where we build momentum that carries your life forward without resistance? Now this is where your life begins to take a new shape, because discipline without direction can still leave you busy but not growing. You can be doing many things, staying active, even feeling productive, yet not making real progress. That is why you must become intentional about your growth. You must decide that every single day you will invest in yourself in a way that moves you forward, not just keeps you occupied. Growth does not happen by accident. It is not something you stumble into. It is something you pursue deliberately. And the moment you stop growing, you start declining, even if it is not immediately visible. That is why you must build a mindset where daily improvement becomes a priority, not an option. The Bible shows us the importance of this in Joshua chapter 1 verse 8, where it says that the book of the law should not depart from your mouth, but you should meditate on it day and night, so that you may observe to do according to all that is written in it. And then you will make your way prosperous and have good success. Notice the process. Meditate daily, act accordingly, and then results follow. Growth is tied to consistency, not occasional effort. And then Proverbs chapter 18 verse 15 says that the heart of the prudent acquires knowledge, and the ear of the wise seeks knowledge. That means wise people don't wait to be forced to grow, they seek it. They look for opportunities to learn. They are intentional about expanding their understanding, improving their skills, and strengthening their mindset. Think about someone who decides to invest in themselves every day. They read, they learn, they reflect, they develop skills, they grow spiritually. It may not look dramatic at first. It may seem slow. But over time, the difference becomes undeniable. Their thinking becomes sharper. Their decisions become better. Their confidence increases. Their opportunities expand. Not because of luck, but because of consistent growth. Now compare that to someone who is always busy but never improving. They are active, always doing something, always involved, but not developing. Their knowledge stays the same, their skills remain limited, their mindset does not expand, and over time they begin to feel stuck, even though they are constantly moving, because movement without growth is stagnation in disguise. This is why you must be intentional with your time. Every day you should be asking yourself, what did I learn today? How did I grow today? What did I do that moved me closer to who I am becoming? Because if you are not growing daily, you are slowly drifting away from your potential. And growth is not only external, it is also internal. Your spiritual life, your mindset, your discipline, your character, these are areas that require constant attention. Because who you are becoming is just as important as what you are achieving. So you must create space for growth. Time to read, time to think, time to develop, time to align with God. Not when it is convenient, but as a priority. Because the more you grow, the more your capacity increases. And the more your capacity increases, the more you are able to handle, to produce, and to impact. This is how transformation happens, not in one big moment, but in daily decisions. Small investments, repeated consistently, leading to significant change over time. Now, as we move forward, you must understand that growth requires protection, because if you do not guard your time and energy, distractions will quietly steal everything you are building. Now we arrive at the point where everything must become permanent, because what you do after this moment determines whether this was just an experience or a turning point. You have gained clarity, you have built discipline, you have established boundaries, you have strengthened your focus, and you have begun to execute. But none of it matters if you do not lock it in with a decision that does not change when circumstances do. So understand this with absolute clarity. You are responsible for your life, not partially, not occasionally, fully. And the moment you accept that, you remove every excuse, you remove every delay, you remove every justification for staying the same. Because now everything comes back to one thing: your choices. Now reflect on where you started. A place where you were overextending, reacting, seeking approval, neglecting yourself without even realizing it. And now you stand in a different position. A position of awareness, a position of control, a position where you can choose differently. But awareness alone is not transformation, decision is. So this is where it becomes real. If you don't choose yourself, the world will choose for you. Your time will be consumed. Your energy will be directed elsewhere. Your life will be shaped by demands that have nothing to do with your purpose. And you will wake up one day realizing that you have been active, but not intentional. However, that does not have to be your reality. Because right here, right now, you have the opportunity to make a decision that changes everything. A decision to stop abandoning yourself. A decision to stop living by default. A decision to stop negotiating with distractions, expectations, and limitations. Now let me be direct with you. Choosing yourself is not comfortable. It will require you to say no when you used to say yes. It will require you to disappoint people who are used to your availability. It will require you to stand firm when it would be easier to adjust. But that discomfort is not a sign that you are wrong. It is a sign that you are growing. Furthermore, choosing yourself is not selfish, it is responsible. Because when you are aligned, when you are focused, when you are disciplined, you become more effective in every area of your life. You show up stronger, clearer, more intentional. And that level of alignment creates impact, not just for you, but for everything connected to you. So from this moment forward, your mindset must shift completely. You are no longer optional in your own life. Your goals are not secondary. Your time is not disposable. Your energy is not unlimited. You treat them with intention, with structure, with discipline. Now feel the weight of this decision. Because this is not about motivation. This is about commitment. And commitment means you move even when it is difficult. You stay consistent even when progress feels slow. You remain focused even when distractions appear. And here is the final truth. Your life will not change because you heard something powerful. It will change because you decided to act on it consistently. Because you chose yourself daily, intentionally, unapologetically. So as you leave this moment, I want you to carry one question with you, and I want it to guide your actions from this point forward. Not what do they expect from me? So not what will people think, but this, what do I require from myself to become who I am meant to be? And whatever that answer is, execute it. Because your life is waiting, and it will respond to the version of you that finally decides to take control. Now the question is no longer whether you understand. The question is, will you choose yourself?